I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Hey everyone, today I have something special to share with you, which is a podcast interview I did with Tina of In Kinship, a podcast for makers who crave a vibrant life on their own terms. So we had a terrific conversation and really got deep on intentionality in sewing and in making and in life, and I hope you enjoy it.
You are listening to the In Kinship podcast, a podcast for makers who crave a vibrant life on their own terms. And I'm your host, Tina VanDenburg. This is a live show, so at the end of the show, we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions, to comment, and talk with Sarai if you'd like to, which leads me to the guest I have today is Sarai Mitnick from Seamwork. She also has a Substack that I thoroughly enjoy called Making Time. All of those links will be in the show notes. Sarai, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay! So I want to start this out. If you were on early to the call, you know that I have a little fangirl on this when it comes to Sarai, because she was one of the first people that I stumbled across doing indie sewing pattern work or even blogging 16 years ago when I started sewing clothing. In fact, I have sewn several of her patterns when it was Colette patterns before Seamwork was even a thing. And I also devoured her book the moment that it was available, the Colette Sewing Handbook. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so vintage designs have always been an inspiration to me. I love the 50s kind of look. And you certainly move into you did move in and out of that type of style. And so I love that book. And I remember distinctly, I was at Christmas with my family and I have this book and it's got, this very vintage look to it. And it's sewing, all of which is sort of in the non-sewing world, it feels sort of antiquated, I guess, to other people. And my sister-in-law is like fully stuck in the 80s still, right? Like if she could do the tall bangs, she would do the tall bangs still, right? So she's listening to the 80s. Now she can listen to it on, I don't know, some kind of satellite radio. But at the time, she would like wait for the 80s band to come on. And she's like, what are you doing? Because she would never sew anything either. So I got a lot of family ridicule for that book. But it hit my soul so deeply. And it hit my soul not only as somebody who was just beginning to sew clothing, but also as somebody who I was in my late 20s and I was really embracing the idea that joy could be found in simple ways. I had just read the book Julie and Julia. And so my timeline might be a little screwy here, but I had read the book Julie and Juliet by Julie Powell, and I was so taken by the fact that somebody could find purpose and meaning in their life just by giving themselves a project, right? Mm-hmm. So I was exploring that in my life. I was exploring food in my life. I was exploring sustainability in my life. And then your book came out, and your take on intentionality in your making and your take on mindfulness just hit me in all the right spots. And it is something that I can attribute to sort of being the gateway for my making journey. In fact, I was part of ages ago. I don't even know what it was called, but I think there were blog posts. You did a blog post on designing your own wardrobe, which is probably the precursor to the program that you have now in Seamwork. I guess.
Yeah, it was called Wardrobe Architect. Yeah.
It was it. Yes. Mm-hmm. I would devour it. In fact, I did it several years in a row. I saved this is this is a while ago. So I saved the blog posts and I would go back and I would read them and do it. Like the mindfulness of it really hit me. So I just want to say on behalf of everybody else who feels the same way I do, and I know there's a ton of us, thank you for the work that you've done in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. That's awesome to hear. I love hearing your story. I feel like all of it really resonated with me, especially what you said about having a project and how important that is to our lives. I think having a creative project to work on can add so much dimension and meaning to anyone's life, whether that is a big project like running a business or a hobby. I think it really is something that is missing from a lot of people's lives these days.
Yeah, I agree. Just gives you that. It just allows for that zing of excitement that comes from I just did this thing.
Yeah.
Look what I've discovered or look what I've found. And, I can imagine it would be very similar on a smaller scale to land exploration.
Yeah.
Or something like that, exploring new lands. So, Jerry, will you share with us what prompted you 15-ish years ago to begin Colette Patterns? Paint the picture of where you were and what made you take the leap to creating this business.
I was living in the Bay Area at the time. So it was before I moved to Oregon. And I was working in the tech industry. I was working in a large company. And it was sort of supposed to be my dream job. It was what I wanted to do. It was shortly after grad school. It was the company I really, really wanted to work for. And in a lot of ways, it was a great career with really smart people that I enjoyed quite a bit. But I was getting really burned out on working for a large business and all of the bureaucracy around that. I really felt like I had this lunch with a friend of mine who also worked there. And I'm sure he wouldn't even remember this, but he said, when you work in a place like this, you're having an impact on so many lives because it's such a large company, but you're having a very, very tiny, tiny impact. And somebody who's, for example, a teacher or a social worker, they have a huge impact on a smaller number of lives. And it's really about what gives you the most meaning. And for me, I realized that I would prefer to have a larger impact on a smaller number of lives and that I would feel more connected to people that way. And so that was one impetus. And then the other thing is that I've just always loved sewing. I'm really, to this day, even 15 years later, even doing it day in, day out, talking about it, writing about it, thinking about it, looking at other people's work, it's still really invigorating to me. And I'm still really passionate about it. I just love it. I just think it's such an amazing hobby that allows so much learning and growth and fun and visual stimulation. I just love everything about it. I've been enjoying sewing since I was a teenager, and it really had a big impact on my life. And so at the time, there was kind of this resurgence of craft happening. There were things like in San Francisco, in the Bay Area at least, there was like the Maker Faire going on, and people were getting really into Etsy, and knitting was big. There was an online knitting magazine called Knitty that I loved. And I thought it would be so cool to create sewing patterns that are different from what's out there already, because I think a lot of people would be really into sewing if they had a way to learn it. But many of us don't have a teacher. We don't have necessarily a mother or a grandmother who can teach us, or somebody else in the family who can teach us. So a lot of people are trying to learn through patterns, but the patterns weren't necessarily teaching instruments. They were really designed for people who already knew how to sew. And so I thought, how about we create something, or I create something that can help people learn as they go. It has more detailed instructions, really is a learning experience at the same time. So that was my impetus to start Colette Patterns. And we started with printed patterns. And I had 5 designs to begin with, which I spent about a year developing. And then I moved to Oregon and quit my job and launched the business. That's the origin story.
I love that. You know what, you have very much achieved what you're looking for, at least in this life. Like, certainly when I first found you, it was when I was just a burgeoning garment sewist. So your book in particular, and your patterns, I guess, as well, because I did sew several of your patterns, really taught me a lot about the actual act of sewing. Not only, like I said, what I talked about earlier, that more intentionality and the mindfulness that it also like just really connected with me on, but also just here's how to put a facing in or these, or here's what you want a facing and all of that. And so that is impressive. Throughout the years, your business has changed, I would say, as an outsider looking in, quite a lot to what from what it began as to what it is now. And I wonder is the business that you have now, is it what you envisioned or dreamed of 15 years ago, or is it different?
Well, that's a great question. No, it's not really what I imagined. But I don't think I had a really clear vision of what I wanted to do with the business. I remember I read this book that was about starting a business before I began, that was written by these two ladies, and I can't remember the name of it, but it talked about how you should write down your goals and write down like a little business plan and all of that stuff. So I remember I had this little Moleskine notebook, and what did I want? What did I want out of this business? And at the time, it was really like, I mean, I'd like to be able to support myself. I'd like to have some freedom in my life and be able to go for walks in the middle of the day sometimes. It was things like that. And I think about that a lot now because, as we've built the business, it can be very easy to get into this mindset of, oh, we need to grow, we need to do this, we need to do that. And really coming back to my original intention was to have a more creative and fulfilling life and to still have some freedom and still have some time to do things like take my dog for a walk in the middle of the day. So I try to remember that that is a really key component of having a business for me, is just having the kind of life that I want as well. And now that I have employees, making sure that they also have that balance in their life. So in a way, yes, because those values are still there, but in a way, no, because I didn't really have much vision when I started out as far as what the business itself would look like.
Right. Okay. I have two questions fighting in my head to get out of my mouth. And they're in different directions. So I'm going to start with that idea of recalibrating back to what it is that you want. It feels like something that I explore a lot in my life as well. In this idea of like, as makers, right? I'm going to build this up here for a minute, but as makers, we can continually like be grabbing onto all the new things we want to make. I want to make this, and this, and this, and I want to do this, and this. And then pretty soon your to-do list has become really large. And I know it's like a hobby to-do list, but it still has, for me, it has weight to it still. And I think that I also just bought property. People in the podcast will be like, yes, we know, but property a few months ago, and I have a million projects to work on it with. Like I moved this little house on wheels onto it, and there's no yard yet, so I'm trying to figure out where the yard's going to go. And I put in some apple trees and things like this, and I started to get this pressure of like, I want to get all these things done. I want to have it all finished, and I want to get moving on it. And then if I can step back and remember, like, all right, hold on, how do I want to feel in my life? How did I want this to feel? Like it feels like that recalibration can really inform everything that we do, including what projects we take on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a lesson that I have to learn over and over and over again. So I'm sure I will learn it again in the future, but I do feel like having that base to return to of how you want to feel in your life and how you want to approach your life and really your values, I think provides kind of a home base to make sure that you are living in the way that you really want to live. And I think that's kind of what intentionality means to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's shift for a moment to making time, the writing that you do as a personal project on Substack. I know that you explore intentionality and mindfulness quite often, and joy, something that I also explore in this podcast. I have certain ways that I make sure that I feel grounded in my day, and then I make sure that I'm bringing in as much joy as I can, because I have a belief that we as humans have more autonomy over how we feel or how we experience life than we maybe give ourselves credit for sometimes. So I wonder how you approach that feeling of ease and joyfulness, like what tools you have in place to bring you a sense of groundedness or whatever your sense of feeling is. I wonder if you could share that with us today.
Yeah, I have quite a few. I think for me personally, I think some of this comes down to personality type, and things that work for one person might not be necessary or might not work for another person. But for me, my personality is a little bit obsessive. I would say I'm an ambitious person, but also a very enthusiastic person. So I get super excited about things, and I love trying new things. I'm very much into like novelty, I would say, like trying something new, but then there are kind of those threads throughout my life that I really stick to at the same time. I just am a more kind of person naturally, I would say. So I have a tendency to like you were talking about before, Tina, like collecting to-dos, collecting hobbies, just keep piling on more and more and more and more stuff. And I do it because I'm really genuinely excited to do it. I'm really passionate about it. And I have this just enthusiasm. And so for me, it can be dangerous because it can lead to burnout. It can lead to just feeling like all of these things that I've piled on my plate are now obligations. They're things that I should be doing, that I promised myself I would do. Oh, I was so excited about this a week ago. Why can't I make it happen? What's wrong with me? It leads to all that kind of self-talk. So over time, I've really discovered that I have to put boundaries in place for myself. And I have to have rituals. I have to have things that I do on a day-to-day basis to ground myself and to make sure that I'm not overcommitting, because I have these things, literally in my calendar, in my day that I have committed to myself that I will do in order to stay centered and calm. But also that will just bring peace of mind and remind me to be joyful in my life, because it's so easy to miss that. It's so easy to forget that I have all of this amazing stuff, all of these amazing people around me, my animals, my home, everything that I've been really lucky and privileged to have. It's really easy to forget about that. So it's kind of that two-pronged thing of actually having those boundaries in place, but then also having the tools to continually remember to live life and just be happy. So that's kind of a long preamble, but the actual things that I do, some of the things that I do. So when I get up in the morning, I like to sit and read for a little while and just have at least 30, 40 minutes to just sit there and read a book and have coffee. So that's how I start my day every day. And then, this can change a little bit with the seasons, but after that, I meditate every day, just like 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a long meditation, but I just do a very simple, follow the breath type meditation. And sometimes I do other exercises and things like that. I like the app Insight Timer, which has a lot of guided meditation. So occasionally I will do a guided meditation. I usually don't do a guided meditation, but sometimes I do, depending on how I feel. And then I get ready for my day, shower and all that, and then play with my dog. We go outside. So this is kind of in detail, but just to paint the picture of like a very quiet morning, like a very, I try to really use that time to just think and be and enjoy life for a little while. And then after that, I get to work. I start by planning my day. So every day I sit down and I plan out my entire day. I have something on my calendar that I picked this up from some business guru, but my perfect week. So that's, it has everything kind of mapped out. Like in an ideal world, this is what my week would look like. And that's actually on a calendar. So I can do that. And I really try to have large chunks of time in my day. In the past, I've had times where my calendar is very much divided up into these little meeting here, meeting there, all these little things. And by the end of the day, I'm like, what did I do today? So I try to have large chunks of time to work on projects and really get deep into them, because that's one thing that really brings me joy, is getting into that flow state, with my work. Because I am very passionate about my work. I really love what I do at work. And it's also another thing that really creatively fulfills me. But if I don't have those big chunks of time dedicated to it, it's not as easy to get into that flow state. So I try to structure my workday that way. And then at 5:00 each day, I have a little closing ritual for my day where I kind of review my day and what were the good things that happened today. I list 3 things that happened that day that were good. And then I work out almost every day after work, which I love. I really love to get some exercise after work.
Yeah.
And I should also mention, in the middle of the day, I take an hour to take my dog for a walk. So back to that original modest vision. Lucy and I go for a walk every day after lunch, which is awesome. We live in the country and it's just gorgeous, especially this time of year in June. It's just so beautiful. So that's a really great opportunity for me to step away from whatever I'm doing and appreciate the natural world. we usually walk down to, there's a creek we live kind of at the top of the hill. And we walk down to the creek at the bottom and she splashes around in the water. And it's just beautiful. So that's in the middle of the day. And then after work, I usually, after dinner and making dinner and all that stuff, sometimes I'll do yoga after work and just kind of chill out, read a book, sit on the porch, whatever it is. But I have so my partner, my husband, works in the business with me. He does a lot of our back end and web development. So we have very strict boundaries in place about work and home. And I work 9 to 5. I don't usually work beyond that. And we don't talk about work outside of work hours. That's really important for us. But we have that unusual thing where we work together. So it's necessary.
I think that's really impressive because I've had a lot of different work that I've done, but I've often had my own business and I've often worked from home. And it can be really difficult to delineate between working hours and non-working hours. And even if I find myself in the evening, if I'm answering work questions or I'm checking my work email, energetically, it feels like I'm on that entire time, even if I've only actually spent 15, 20 minutes doing it. And I think there's such a value as I also explore my own life and like what brings me peace, what brings me joy, what makes me the happiest is like, I need that delineation. So I think that two things here. I think that ritual that you do at the end of your day is really smart because it gives you that ability to like delineate between the work day and the non-work day. And I think that having the boundaries around that with your coworker husband is really smart as well. And I think it sort of falls back to that idea of how much ease can come when we're actually just doing one thing.
Yeah, I agree. I will say, actually, the closing ritual is something I've implemented more recently, but for the last several years, I would work out right after I finished my workday. And there's something about physical activity that I think is so important for my mental health, at least. There's a really great book, I think I've probably recommended on the podcast before, called Burnout. And it's one of the most important ideas in that book is that we have this natural kind of stress cycle in our bodies where when something stresses us out or when we have, that stress response, the way we've evolved is that our bodies want to do something physical to release that stress. And if you can do something physical, like running or, lifting weights, which is what I usually do after work, then it tells your body that it's safe to relax now, that you've addressed whatever the issue was, you ran away from the tiger or whatever it is, and you're okay now. So there's something about, and I think stress can be good. I don't think stress needs to necessarily be a bad thing. And we have natural stress, I think, throughout our day, and especially in our work lives for many of us, and for a lot of us in our family lives. And so I think having that time to be physically active and physically release the stress in my body is really important to me.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of research personally on nervous system healing. And so a lot of the ways that we signal safety to our bodies is through motion, like shaking is kind of an idea too, or just physically getting out and exerting our bodies. And it just comes back to that idea to me that idea, and then listening to you as you lay out your sort of structure for your day, right? Which if you hit those days, you feel pretty satisfied, I would guess, with the day.
Yeah.
You feel pretty like at ease with like, this day was a good day, like that feeling. None of those were huge, insurmountable mountains to climb towards happiness or joy. They are in the moment because you have to make a choice to like read your book and drink your coffee rather than check your email right away. Like you have to make those individual choices. But I am always struck by how it's just small things really that we continually promise to do for ourselves that can bring so much reward into our lives.
Yeah, they are small things, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're easy, I think. They seem easy when you're just thinking about them from, kind of an intellectual perspective. What's easier than drinking coffee and reading a book first thing in the morning? That sounds pretty easy, but there are a lot of messages, internal and external, and a lot of pressures that can take you away from those really, really simple things.
Yeah.
So it's simple, but it's not necessarily always easy. And for me, it's very easy to fall off the train if I'm not careful. So that's kind of another component, is just having that commitment to myself and
Right.
enough care for myself that I'm willing to forgo things that seem urgent sometimes,
Right.
in order to prioritize long-term, viability. So that's a way I try to think about it. But again, I'm far from perfect on this, and there are times where things don't go right, and there are times where I just have to come back to it. What we were talking about before about reorienting.
Yeah.
And I think that's just natural. That's something I think we all go through.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily define myself as a perfectionist, but I do get really hard on myself when I don't follow through on my commitments to myself. And as I don't know if this is aging, I once had this woman circle, right? And I was in my mid 30s at the time. And the woman that said this was in her mid 40s. She's like, "Oh yeah, that's because you're in your 30s." And I was like, "What?" That's so insulting, right? Like we're just in this phase because we're this age. And then now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, is this because I'm in my 40s? Telling this to me. But I have found that, like, my biggest lessons, or the biggest things that I'm working through right now in my own growth, is like just allowing it to be. So like a morning ritual is really important to me as well. And for the longest time I had it, I can be really nerdy. So I had like the spreadsheet and I had it all listed out. This is what that perfect week would look like. This is what the perfect day would look like. And then I finally realized, like, I had so much pressure on myself to achieve this. And I also had this sort of rebellious nature that's like, let's not do that. Let's do this instead, right? This kind of that you have to fight. So where I finally decided, which I think might be the key to life, I'm not sure, to just allow myself to be who I am. And rather than having a morning ritual that is like, I do this for 10 minutes, I do that for 20, I do this for 30, have it be open and decide, like, I'm going to commit to doing a morning ritual. I get to pick on that day what that looks like, right? And just allowing myself to work with my own personality and what really works for me, so that I don't instigate that little rebellious nature of mine to be like, oh, don't put me in this little box because I'm going to do it how I want to. But I just keep coming back to the idea that there's so much ease that comes from just allowing ourselves to be who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is also experimentation and figuring out what works for you and being willing to change if it's not working for you. A lot of the things that I've tried have just been, like you're saying, maybe they were too rigid. Maybe they just made me feel like it was one more thing to do, one more thing on my to-do list. The things that I do now, at least at this moment, don't feel that way.
Yeah.
So, but that might change, over time. So I think a lot of it is just being willing to experiment a little bit and also listen to yourself and how you're feeling, which is not always something I've been good at. So that's another thing that I feel like I have to practice, is just, how do I actually feel? Not how do I wish that I felt right now,
Right. Right. And allowing that to be.
Yeah.
Is this anything that interests you? Do you ever look at like your human design or astrology? Do you ever add any of that kind of information into the fact finding about yourself?
No, I don't really know very much about that. I have been learning a little bit about the Enneagram lately, which I think is really interesting and kind of fun to learn about. So I learned that I'm a 3, which is like the ambitious person, I guess. I'm reading a book about it, so I'm trying to learn a little bit about it just because I think it's really fun, and I think it's really interesting to learn about like personality types, even if I don't completely buy into it, just because it kind of gives you a frame to think about things and talk about things and explore yourself and explore your relationships with other people. So that's the one kind of like a little bit more woo thing that I am into right now, but I don't really do a lot of that. So
yeah. I find it fascinating for that same reason. I think our reaction to what we read is really telling, right? Like, are we really grounded in like, what? No, that's totally not me. Or like, for me, when I did my Enneagram, probably 8 or 9 years ago, I don't remember exactly what it said. I think I was a 3 as well, but it said it was highlighting when I'm in a dysregulated state or when I'm most sort of vulnerable to dysregulation is probably the best word. And it was something along the lines of not feeling worthy of love, something like that. And I immediately was like, no, what is this even? I was so angry that I actually might have thrown the book, because I think I had a book, across the room. And then I'm like, okay, so if my reaction is going to be so visceral and so strong to this, maybe there's something there for me to explore. And so it actually was the beginning of a really deep healing that I had in some ways I didn't even know that I had as a wound. And so that was really pivotal for me. I still kind of hate Enneagram because it really still makes me kind of angry that that's what it told me. But I do find it fascinating, and I'm really into human design. Again, that is like the be all end all, like this is who you are and who you need to like now conform to be. Mm-hmm. But as in like, for me, there's been so many areas where one, I might find insight based on my own reaction. I don't know why we often need this, but I often find permission in it to kind of be myself, be like, oh yeah, that is who I am. And maybe it was something that I found really frustrating, but now it's like, oh, it's okay. This is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's very true. You know, I read a really great book recently that I had kind of a similar reaction to, which is The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control by Catherine Schaefer, I think her name is. So it's about perfectionism. And there was a time where I definitely did not consider myself a perfectionist. And it was actually reading Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection that made me realize, oh, maybe I kind of am. And then this book was even more, I think, illuminating because she talks about different kinds of perfectionists. And I discovered that I am what she refers to as a messy perfectionist, which is that I am highly organized, but also kind of messy. Like if you could see around me right now, there's sewing stuff everywhere. It's a little bit physically chaotic, but I'm also extremely organized at the same time. And it seems like such a contradiction, but it's true. And I'm the kind of person who just like I was saying before, is a more kind of person. I tend to just accumulate a lot of things to do and a lot of hobbies and all kinds of stuff. So I really saw myself in that characterization in that book. But another really important point she makes is that if you are a perfectionist of one kind or another, that it's okay. It's okay to be that way.
Right.
You know, you don't have to change yourself, that it's actually in many ways a superpower. And yes, it has some drawbacks to it, but any strength you have has drawbacks to it. And so learning that it's okay to embrace the way you are and the things that make you you, as long as you're not harming yourself or harming other people, and finding a healthy way to do it, finding the way for you that feels good and feels healthy is really what it's all about. So that was a real eye-opener for me about self-acceptance and learning that, you know, I don't have to conform to a certain type of person that I might dream of being, that's Zen all the time and doesn't
everything's
like,
in place.
Yeah, and isn't quite so harried or ambitious or whatever it is that I wish was different. That was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah. In that same women's group that I mentioned earlier, there was a good friend of mine, and she always used to say, which also used to irritate me, she always used to say, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And I'm like, oh, shut up. You know, and now I'm like, wow, that was really wise. I'm going to have dinner with this night. I'm going to have to tell her and apologize for the internal message I had when she used to say that.
That's funny.
Yeah. So let's bring it back to making for a minute. Mm-hmm. What are you excited to work on now as far as a personal project? Like, let's just leave it at that. What are you excited to work on right now?
As far as like hobby projects and things like that? Oh, so many things. Like I said, I'm surrounded by the chaos of all my making right now. So as far as sewing stuff goes, I'm working on some of our upcoming patterns right now, just making things for myself and for videos. And I'm very excited about that at the moment because I'm really diving into details and like details that I can add to things, which is really, really fun for me. I have a lot of older sewing books, from the 80s and whatnot that have a lot of cool heirloom details. So I'm learning a bit about that. The other day I was planning out a couple of these projects, and it was a Saturday, and I was like, I'm going to go, decide what I'm going to make and cut them out. And I ended up spending like 2 hours just looking through these books and trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to make. And so that's something I'm really excited about right now. And then other personal projects, my garden, it's June, so I'm very immersed in gardening right now and growing vegetables and some flowers, but a lot of vegetables. So that's taking up a lot of my time right now. And making time, which is the Substack newsletter you mentioned earlier, I'm trying to spend a little bit more time on that. That's a little bit, I try not to be too strict with myself about writing for that these days. When I started, I was like, I'm going to write every week and I'm going to have this schedule. And it just became kind of I was being a little bit too strict with myself. So it's really just my fun place to write about anything that's interesting to me right now, ideas that have come to me from books I'm reading or just things that I see reflected in my life. I try to leave that space a little bit more open. I share links to really interesting things I've read online, that sort of thing. So that's it's a fun little side project and definitely a bit of a creative outlet for me as well.
Yeah. Well, it resonates for me deeply, and I look forward to them every time they come out. And I think I love it that you're giving yourself grace around it, because I think that probably all of us can relate to this. And when you're a business owner as well, we put so much pressure on like having to do things on a certain schedule, or like you've put out a schedule, so now you have to maintain that schedule, rather than just be like, this no longer works. Now this is going to work. And like, I think that bit of grace, when you're in sort of the public eye, I think that having that little bit of grace for yourself and sharing it allows all the rest of us to set permission, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, at least for me and having a business, I do feel definitely a sense of commitment to everything that I'm doing there, as far as, writing and creating videos and all the things that we're doing at Teamwork, and my commitments to the other people who work there. So it's nice to have, when it comes to my hobbies, things outside of work, it's nice to have a place to come where it's what I feel like doing. Really.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. Sarah, before we open this up to any questions our guests today might have, I have a question I love to ask all of my guests on the podcast. And my question is, what do you think people should, of course, a complicated word, but what do you think people should know deep in their hearts, or you wish that they knew deep in their hearts that maybe they don't?
This might sound a little bit of a downer, but for me, I think one thing that is important to remember is that life is limited and that life is short, and we are all going to die at some point. And I think that's something that people have a natural resistance to, of course. And so we forget that life is so limited, and that, this day is the only day like it that you're going to have. And to make the most of, and it sounds like a cliche, but just to make the most of each day, each moment, and especially each moment you have with the people that you love. And I think just remembering, occasionally reflecting on the limited time we all have on Earth, and that we don't know how long that time is going to be. For me, it's grounding and brings me back to what's important in my life. So it's hard to think about. It's not pleasant to think about. Before we started recording, I mentioned that I just read a book by Suleika Jawad. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She also has a wonderful Substack newsletter called The Isolation Journals. She battled with leukemia in her 20s and now, and just finished her memoir. And it just really made me think about the times in my life where I've had to face challenging health circumstances, either for myself or somebody else, or had to face mortality. And there is something in her memoir, there's just something so beautiful and so enlightening about seeing somebody come through that and their perspective on the world afterwards. And to me, that's just something that I try to keep in mind, and it helps me to be more connected and to remember to show love to other people as much as I possibly can. So I think if we all remembered that, we might be a little kinder to each other.
Well, yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. It's a great question.
Mhm. Yeah. So, any of you who are here with us live today, if you'd like to talk with Sarai or share something or ask a question, we would love to chat with you. Just raise your hand if you will. I'll keep my eye out for some raised hands, but I did want to share something that made me, I guess, just like the invigoration that can come with facing the mortality of somebody that you love or facing our own mortality. I have a man that I dated for most of my 20s, and he passed away last year, which was incredibly sad. But his younger sister, who's a decade younger than him, she and I still keep in touch. And she has started a new project to go and see the world, because she's like, my older brother was 10 years older than me and he passed away. And it just really hit her as if she only had 10 more years. What would she do with it? How would she have wanted to spend those 10 years? Mm-hmm. And I think that for her, it invigorated her to do this project that she hadn't found the energy or the time to get off the ground. And she's like, what if I only had 10 more years left? And she's off and running. And I think that's beautiful. And my dad is also often, he's on the kidney transplant list, and he's often in a state of emergency. And so I would not wish that on him by any means, but every time I go down and I spend time with him in the hospital, the gift of it, I guess, is it gives me this moment to sort of recalibrate my life and be like, all right, what matters here, what doesn't? Because I just want to sort of call the things that don't really matter towards what I want in life.
Yeah, definitely. That experience of being close to someone who is in danger in that way can be it's so incredibly difficult. It's like the most difficult thing that we can deal with. But at the same time, there's not really a silver lining to it. I don't want to say that. It's just something we all have to deal with in life, I think. And so, and if you haven't had to deal with it yet, you will at some point. And so I think there is something very profound in it.
Yeah.
And very connecting to other people.
Yes. Yeah. And it sort of has the opportunity to burn away, like I said, but the ways that we're just filling our time, the ways that we're just walking through life sort of not awake, I guess.
Yeah. And I do wonder sometimes, I had an experience. So when I was young, when I was 12 years old, I had a very serious surgery and spent some time in the hospital. And I look back on that and I sometimes wonder if the pain I experienced at a young age and relearning how to walk and doing some of these things that put me, I wasn't in danger of dying or anything, but I just dealing with that physical limitation and that physical difficulty. I do wonder if that had some kind of effect on my outlook on life later, and feeling like a little bit more risk tolerant than a lot of people I know, and kind of willing to do things that maybe a lot of people aren't so comfortable with. Other people have different life circumstances and different approaches to life naturally. So I don't want to attribute it to only that, but I do wonder about that.
Right. I think those experiences that we have in life are so pivotal. So when I was in my young years and in early 20s, I was in 3 different house fires. And so I don't have any belongings from before 25. They're horrific in their own ways, but I love to cull what I have. I love to go through and like shift things and only keep what's really important to me. And I don't have that same sort of, for better or worse, I guess, I don't have that same sort of like hang on to things to me. And I wondered if that, because I lost everything several times, I wonder if that influenced that, right? That I know what it feels like to not have anything, and it's okay.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, you really don't know where painful experiences are going to take you.
Yeah.
You know, when they're happening, they feel so horrible. and they are. But at the same time, without them, you have to wonder what kind of a person you'd be without pain in your life,
Right. Right. Anyone in our audience want to jump in? I know we've gone into sort of a deep conversation. You're welcome to join in that conversation if you'd like, or if you want to share anything that you're making or any thoughts that came up for you during our conversation today. Feel free to do that.
Yes, I joined you last week at the end, and I just enjoyed it so much. And this is an amazing podcast. And Sarah, I followed you also and appreciate you. And I'm learning about Tina now, but this has been an amazing, it's more like church than it is like. Before you all said it about the Enneagram, and I'm an Episcopalian, and there's a lady in our diocese that had a 12-week class on Enneagram using Suzanne Stabile's work. If you look it up, it's called Life in the Trinity, and she's out of Dallas, but she has her curriculum. So we had a 12-week curriculum. I took it in the fall with my sister from Texas, and I'm in Illinois now with my kids. Then we took it again in the spring. So I had that, and it's not the gospel, but it is helpful. Mm-hmm. And I think it was interesting that I lost my job in December anyway. Like I was 64 and I got let go from being a special ed teacher, and it was traumatic. But then in the exit interview, I said, well, I'm a strong believer in providence, And my older daughter said, Mom, just come live with me. And they were in North Carolina, and we moved all across the state to Illinois. And my other two daughters came here too. So we had a house full of my daughters and my precious son-in-law. But anyway, the first few weeks after that Enneagram, I thought to myself that God was saying, you could try loving again. Or the romantic, because I divorced 16 years ago, 49-year marriage, mentally unhealthy husband who's totally out of the picture. My kids and I are just really close because of that. And I hadn't gone to coffee with a man in 16 years. And then I met this really nice man at the YMCA, and he's 8 years older, but we talk, and he's Catholic and I'm Episcopalian, and I love, religion stuff. And anyway, it's just been really sweet. I don't want to get married. I don't want to go live with him, but it's enriched my life as many other things have. But I told him when I first met him in November, I said, if you'll do the Enneagram, he endured 12 weeks of the Enneagram. And
wow.
He's an 8, and he's a very businesslike. And he was like, he did it for me, but he held in there. So my kids had done it, and they knew all about it. And they talked, Brene Brown and the Enneagram. And I thought, well, what are y'all talking about? So anyway, it is a tool that is interesting and helpful. So, yeah. But I just appreciate all of your wonderful, profound comments. And I agree about the deaths, even the divorce deaths, and it had to happen. I did all I could for 29 years, and that was it. And we call it Independence Day. Anyway, my middle child took his life, when he was 24 and a half, and that was he made that commitment, and we talked about it, and he talked to his sisters, and we couldn't change his mind. So, he's just right over there. He's just over the veil, but I'm not going to let myself be obsessed, because that's what he did, what he wanted to do. He was adult, whatever. So we all have these things, and it's just beautiful to visit with you lovely ladies about all these things.
So, well, thanks for sharing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice to hear from you.
I'm trying to get my husband to do the Enneagram. There's like an online, 30-minute quiz you can do that helps you uncover which one you are. So I told him I would send it to him today. If nothing else, it's just a way to have a conversation about your personality and who you are. So there's no harm in it.
Oh, no. Super fun.
I don't think men like it very much.
No. Especially skeptical men.
Yeah. Oh. So, well, thank you for joining us. It's so nice to have you here.
But I also want to say that just what you all were talking about, planning your day and making your day count. And Bill and I, my boyfriend and I just had this conversation last night because he's very much, if he gets his to-do list done, he's been retired 12 years, but it's got to be more than about the to-do list, and he kind of sees that. But anyway, I struggle with all the things that y'all do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for this, though. It's been great.
Thank you. Anyone else want to hop in and chat with us?
That was really wonderful, though.
It's fun
hearing from you.
It's always fun to have, somebody else come in. And I was before our call, and Sybil really reinforced this for me. Is like, actually, one of the questions I have a million questions I didn't get to with you because we just had this beautiful flow in this conversation. But one of the questions was, when it comes to joy, when it comes to intentional living, do you think we ever get there, wherever there is? Do you think we ever get to that spot, like the spot that we're sort of striving to get to?
I don't think there is a finish line, personally.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of given up on that. I think life comes and goes, and I don't think there's ever a period where we just experience joy all the time. I just don't think that's in human nature.
Yeah.
Personally, both because there are a lot of external things that are bound to happen to you that are naturally going to be unhappy. But I also think humans have a lot of natural tendencies that take us away from that. And I think it's just about coming back to it over and over again. Mm-hmm. And that's why practices and rituals are so important to me, and why I write about that a lot on the personal newsletters. Just, I think it's always a recentering and returning process, and not necessarily a stability that is going to last through the rest of your life.
Right. I agree 100%. And then, like I said, I was walking with my friend this morning, and I'm talking about the property and all the projects. And like, there is not that long ago in my life that would have caused me a lot of stress to think about all the things I have to do in order to get the vision that I see. Right. And then I'm like, again, I'm not sure if this is being in my mid-40s, if this is just growth or what this is, but there's something about this year that I'm looking at all these projects, and I'm like, I'm just going to go at each project with the kind of energy that I want to feel every day. And I'm going to allow them to unfold as they do. And I have a grander vision for what it's going to look like out my window here. I have a grander vision for what it's going to look like, but I'm just going to work at it. And I may never get there. It may never.
If anybody has read the writer Oliver Burkeman, he writes about this a lot. And this idea that a big part of life is just accepting its limitations, so that you're never going to reach some state where you are able to do all the things that you want to do. It's just right. That's just not going to happen. And so, a big part of finding peace is just like being willing to accept that. I think that has, he writes a lot about productivity from that point of view, that there is no perfect productivity. And that really resonates for me, because I feel like a certain amount of finding happiness is just accepting that some things are going to go by the wayside. And, maybe my house is not going to be clean 100% of the time, and I just have to accept that. So right. It's tough if you are a perfectionist, but that's a big life lesson for me that I'm continually learning.
Very nice. Do you mind if I ask you one last question?
Mm-hmm.
It is one else right here, so I don't want to hold anybody who's going to jump. But along those same lines, I wonder, how do you keep, to bring it back to making for a minute, how do you keep your making fresh? And do you feel like you ever get to, I'm assuming the answer will be similar, but do you ever get to a state of like finished when it comes to what you're going to learn or what you can embrace as far as your making goes?
No, I mean, I think it's like the rest of life. But I think that's one of the, at least for my creativity and the things I do just for creative practice, I feel like that's part of the joy of it, is just the continual learning. And that's one reason I really love sewing, is just that I'm always learning something. It's the same reason I love running a business. It's just there's always more to learn. And for me, that's very gratifying. I love learning new things. It's one of my big motivators in life, is learning something and then sharing whatever I learn. And hopefully it's helpful to somebody else. that's something that I just get tremendous joy from. And I'm so lucky to have built an entire career around that, about learning about something I'm really excited about, which is sewing, and then sharing that with other people. So I don't think there's ever a point where I feel like things are going to be done. And thank goodness, that's for me, that's not the point. So, and I guess that's a good lesson to take into life too. If you think about it that way, that life's never going to be perfect and done and just the way you want it. And that's the beauty of it, is that you're always going to be changing, and you're always going to be learning and growing and becoming somebody new. And isn't that cool?
It is. It is so cool. Sarai, else is cool? It was so cool to talk to you today. I'm so glad you were here.
Yeah, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that you asked me to be here.
Good. I'm glad to have you here. Before we jump off real quick, if folks want to find you, where can they find you online? And I will have this in the show notes, but if they're just wanting to look at it right now, where can they find you online?
Well, our podcast is Seamwork Radio. So if you like listening to this podcast, you can check that out. You can check us out on YouTube. I love making videos. That's one of the things that I love doing in my work. And we're always improving our videos. So you can find us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can go to seamwork.com, which is where you'll find our community, and all of our patterns and everything that we do is right there at Seamwork. And then if you want to check out my own personal newsletter, it's called Making Time. It's on Substack.
Very nice. Thank you for being here. I was just checking to make sure we didn't miss any questions, but we didn't. Lots of love for the work that you do and your podcast and so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.
So thank you to Tina for having me on her show. If you want to check it out, it's called In Kinship, and you can find it on your podcast platform of choice. And definitely subscribe, because obviously Tina is a wonderful host and has some great conversations. So I just wanted to say thank you to her, and also thank you to you guys for listening. And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a review. We would really appreciate it. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you choose that you're listening to right now. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, remember that our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that does it for me this week. I'm Sarai, and this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.